She got into her husband's car and found a tube of personal lubricant in the glove compartment. She didn't say a word. She just secretly replaced it with industrial superglue. And what happened next forced their neighbors to make an emergency call to the fire department. She sat at the kitchen table, the silence in the house as thick as morning fog, a silence that had become a constant, unwelcome guest. The old clock on the wall, a wedding gift from her late mother, ticked with a relentless, accusatory rhythm. Each beat was a painful reminder of a life she was beginning to suspect was a beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. Her husband, Julian, had just returned from one of his countless business dinners. He looked not merely exhausted, but haunted, as if he carried the weight of a secret too heavy to bear. His face was a map of fatigue and guilt, lines etched around his eyes and mouth that had never been there before. He tossed his jacket on the sofa with a weariness that felt performative, loosened his tie as if it were a noose he was desperate to escape, and collapsed onto the bed, the familiar springs groaning under his weight, without even bothering to shower. The faint scent of his expensive cologne hung in the air, but it was mixed with a new, alien fragrance, a sweet floral perfume that felt like an intrusion, a brazen confession from a life she didn't know he was living. A few minutes later, the gentle hum of his snoring filled the house, a sound that once brought her comfort but now felt like a mocking lullaby. A lullaby for a fool. She got up, moving with the quiet, practiced grace of a wife of 40 years, and began to tidy up the mess he'd left in the living room. His jacket, his wallet, his cell phone, his old laptop. The phone screen was still on, a new email glowing like a sinister omen. She frowned. Julian never used email. He always said, "Juliet, all this tech stuff is too complicated. I'd rather just make a call." But now an email. It was right there in plain sight. A digital ghost from a life she didn't know he was leading. Out of a morbid curiosity that felt both wrong and necessary, she opened it. The message was short, a mere handful of words that would shatter her world. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." It was followed by a red heart, a symbol of affection that pierced her own heart with a cold, sharp ache. She froze as if someone had slapped her. The digital world was a cruel mirror reflecting a truth she was too terrified to see. Dad. The word echoed in her mind. Who was calling him that? And in such an intimate, affectionate tone. She swiped down, her thumb trembling, looking for more clues. But there was nothing. Just a strange email address, a jumble of meaningless characters that offered no answers, only more questions. A shiver ran through her, not from cold, but from a profound, bone-deep fear. It felt like a cold wind coming in through a crack in the door of her life, revealing a secret chamber she never knew existed. She glanced at the bedroom and saw Julian turn over with a sputtering snore, his face still and peaceful, a stark and infuriating contrast to the storm raging inside her. Her heart pounded like a thief's, a frantic, guilty beat. She quickly put the phone back, her hands shaking so much she almost dropped it. She continued cleaning up, her movements now mechanical, robotic. She gathered his dirty clothes to take to the laundry. As she checked his pant pockets, she felt a folded piece of paper, crisp and new. It was a receipt from a fancy steakhouse in San Antonio dated that very night. She frowned. San Antonio? He had told her he was meeting his partners in Dallas. A tiny, bitter laugh escaped her lips. Julian hated driving to Dallas. San Antonio, on the other hand, was where his mother had lived before she passed away. He had fond memories there, a fact he had often reminded her of. But who had he had dinner with in San Antonio while lying to her about being in Dallas? The receipt showed a party of two, a bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, a wine he had bought her for their 10th anniversary, a wine she had never forgotten, and main courses of filet and pasta. She tried to remember the last time Julian took her to a place like that. Maybe 10 years ago, when she opened her first bakery. It was a memory etched in her mind. The flickering candlelight, his proud smile, the way he toasted her success. Now that memory was a lie, a faded photograph in a scrapbook of deceit. She took out her own phone and, with a silent, determined resolve, snapped a picture of the receipt and the email. She didn't want to believe it, but a woman's intuition, a wife of 40 years' intuition, is a deep, primal knowing. Something was going on, and she had to find out what it was. Her hands were trembling, not just with anger, but with a deep, existential dread. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to witness the spectacular collapse of her entire life. She went to the garage. Julian's old SUV was still warm, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and that faint sweet perfume from his clothes. She opened the door, a small, cold dread gripping her stomach. She turned on her flashlight and checked every corner of the driver's seat. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just some loose change and an empty water bottle. But as she reached into the passenger side glove box, her fingers brushed against something plastic and slippery. She pulled it out, and her heart almost stopped. A tube of used personal lubricant with dried residue on the cap, a sticky, damning piece of evidence. She stood there in the dark garage, staring at it as if it were a dirty secret, a tangible manifestation of her worst fears. Julian and she hadn't been intimate in years. He always said he was tired. That age had sapped his desire. So, what was this lubricant for? The question echoed in her mind, each syllable a hammer blow to her fragile reality. She felt paralyzed but kept a clear head, a survival instinct kicking in. She put it back exactly where she'd found it. She wiped her hands with a napkin, scrubbing them raw, as if she were afraid the betrayal would leave a permanent mark on her skin. She continued searching, this time more carefully, more methodically. Under the back seat, she found some crumpled napkins soaked in a sweet floral perfume that wasn't a man's and wasn't her soft, familiar rose fragrance. The scent was alien, defiant, a loud, vulgar shout of infidelity in the quiet sanctuary of their garage. She took photos of everything, the lubricant, the napkins, as if she could capture the scent in an image. She closed the car and went back inside, the weight of the evidence pressing down on her, heavier than any flour sack she had ever lifted. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she picked up Julian's phone again. By this point, she was almost certain he was cheating on her. She checked his messages, but there were only work chats, cold and dry, like a desert landscape. His inbox was empty, except for that one strange email. She checked the sent and draft folders. Nothing. Everything was too clean, too perfect, suspiciously so, as if he had erased every trace of his deception. A master of lies, she thought bitterly. Her rage was now a cold, hard stone in her chest, and a new, more dangerous emotion began to stir within her, a desire for truth, a need to expose the lie, no matter the cost. The next morning, just as the sun rose and the soft light filtered through the window curtains, she was already awake, a ghost in her own house. The image of the lubricant, the restaurant receipt, and that email wouldn't stop swirling in her head, a venomous carousel of doubt. She stood in the kitchen, her hands busy, but her mind a frantic whirlwind. She made a simple breakfast, 2 fried eggs, some toast, and a cup of the strong black coffee Julian liked. She had barely slept all night. Julian came down looking tired, his hair a mess, and his eyes still groggy. He sat at the table, grabbed his coffee cup, took a sip, and set it down half full. "I have an important meeting today," he said in a husky voice, a rehearsed line he'd used countless times before, without looking her in the eye. "I'm sure I'll be home late." He was so good at this, she thought. The easy lies, the casual tone, it made her blood run cold. She nodded with a strained smile, though all she wanted to do was scream. "Where is the meeting? With whom? In San Antonio again?" But she held back, her rage a silent fire, and simply replied, "All right, be careful." He got up, gave her a light pat on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like an afterthought than a sign of affection, and left. The door closed, leaving the kitchen in silence, and her with a suspicion that was growing into a monstrous certainty. She cleared the table and washed the dishes one by one, the rhythm of the task a small anchor in the storm of her emotions. She couldn't just sit there inventing theories. She needed the truth, hard evidence. She picked up her phone and looked for the number for Mrs. Miller, a friend from years ago who had helped her so much when she first opened the bakery. She had once told her about a good private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases. "Juliet, if you ever need it, I can give you Thomas's number," she had said. "He's very discreet and reliable." Juliet never thought she would need to call him, but now she had no other choice. She dialed her number, her voice trembling, each ring a drumbeat of her mounting anxiety. "Hello, Mrs. Miller. Can you help me get in touch with Thomas? I need him." She was silent for a few seconds, a pause that spoke volumes, before answering. Juliet, what's going on? Did Julian do something? Juliet sighed, not wanting to get into the details over the phone, her pride bruised and raw. I just need to know the truth. Can you help me? Mrs. Miller, a woman of few words but profound intuition, agreed immediately, and just an hour later, Juliet received a message from Thomas asking her to meet him at noon at a small cafe downtown. Mrs. Roberts, please don't worry. I will help you, he wrote. The message was short, but it was enough to give her a little relief. A lifeline in a sea of deceit. At noon, she went to the cafe, a tiny place with worn wooden tables and the aroma of roasted coffee filling the air, a scent that usually comforted her but now felt strangely foreign. She chose a secluded corner where no one would notice her, a shadow in a room full of light. Thomas walked in, a middle-aged man, short and stocky, with a simple light blue shirt and philosophical eyes that seemed to read everything, to see through the surface of things. She handed him a flash drive with the photos she had taken the night before, the strange email, the restaurant receipt, the lubricant tube, and some napkins. This is all I have, she said, her voice shaky. I'm not sure, but I think my husband is cheating on me. The words tasted like ash. Thomas nodded, reviewing each image on his phone, his face impassive, a professional facade hiding whatever thoughts he had. He carefully made notes in a small notebook. Mrs. Roberts, I understand. I'll start following Mr. Roberts this afternoon. Don't worry, I'll let you know as soon as possible. She looked at him, trying to hold back the tears that were burning her eyes. Thank you, she said softly. I just want to know the truth, whatever it may be. Thomas nodded with a compassionate look, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. I'll do my best. Go home and don't do anything to arouse suspicion. She left the cafe and walked through the crowd, but she felt a loneliness she had never experienced before. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime built on a foundation of trust that was now crumbling beneath her feet. She had put all her trust in Julian. She always believed he was a family man, someone who would be with her through any difficulty. He was her rock, her anchor. And now here she was, hiring a stranger to follow her own husband. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She felt like she was in a bad movie, a character in a drama she never auditioned for. That night, as she sat in the bakery, the familiar scent of yeast and flour a constant, soothing presence, going over delivery invoices, her phone vibrated. A message from Mr. Thomas. She opened it, her heart pounding a mile a minute, the blood roaring in her ears. It was a photo of Julian in the light blue shirt he often wore, entering a fancy restaurant, holding hands with a woman. She zoomed in on the image, and her heart stopped. It was Allison, her daughter-in-law. She was wearing a tight black dress with heavy makeup, intense red lipstick, and her hair down. They didn't look like father-in-law and daughter-in-law, but like a couple on a date. Their bodies turned toward each other, a shared secret between them. She sank into her chair, her hand trembling as she held the phone. Allison, how was this possible? At family gatherings, she and Julian always acted distant, barely speaking to each other. Juliet now realized it was a masterful act, a performance for her benefit. Mr. Thomas sent more photos. In one, they were sitting in a secluded corner, the table decorated with candles and flowers. Allison was leaning toward him, smiling, and Julian was toasting her glass with an oddly tender gaze. Juliet saw the photo and felt a crushing pain in her chest. In 40 years, she had never seen him look at her like that, not even when they were young. When she was that girl from San Diego with long hair and a radiant smile, he had looked at her that way, a look of genuine adoration, of a love she thought was hers. Now it was Allison's. In the middle of the night, a video arrived from Mr. Thomas. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m. She put on her headphones, a desperate attempt to keep the secret contained, and pressed play, her hands so shaky she almost dropped the phone. In the video, Allison leaned close to Julian's ear, whispering something that made him laugh loudly, a sound that was a stranger to Juliet. Her voice sounded sweet, her eyes sparkling under the restaurant lights. Then they got up and left, and Julian, ever the gentleman, opened the car door for her as if she were a lady and he were her lover. She replayed the video again and again, a self-inflicted torture. Each time felt like another stab to the heart. Allison, her daughter-in-law, whom she had treated like her own daughter, whom she had taught how to make their family's traditional flan, and Julian, the man she had given her whole life to, with whom she had built a family. What were they doing behind her back? Behind Daniel's back? The questions were a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. She saved all the photos and the video to a flash drive, making a note of every detail, date, time, place, even the name of the restaurant. Her hands worked on autopilot, but her mind was in chaos. She didn't want to believe it. She couldn't believe Julian and Allison were capable of something so low, so cruel. But the evidence was right in front of her, undeniable, a mountain of proof. She stayed in the bakery among trays of sweet pastries that smelled delicious. But she felt like her world was falling apart. She remembered the early days of the business when Julian would help her carry sacks of flour, when they would laugh together in that little kitchen, their dreams as big as the sky. Now it all seemed like a distant memory, a beautiful lie she had lived for too long. The next morning, she was in the small kitchen of the bakery, holding a list of orders for a large hotel downtown. The smell of flour and vanilla, which always brought her peace, felt empty that day, a hollow comfort. As soon as she finished signing the delivery invoice, her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. She wiped her hands, and her heart sank when she saw it was a message from the detective. Just a short sentence. "Mrs. Roberts, I'm sending you more evidence." She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but her hands trembled as she opened the message. A series of photos appeared on the screen. The first showed Julian in his usual gray shirt, leaving a law office near the main plaza. By his side was Allison in a beige office dress, her hair in a high ponytail, and huge dark sunglasses that almost covered her face. A pathetic attempt at anonymity. They were walking very close together, not like in-laws, but like a couple. Their bodies were a testament to their forbidden bond. In the next photo, they were standing in front of a 4-star hotel with gleaming glass doors and a gold sign. She zoomed in, desperately looking for some sign to deny what she was seeing, but there was nothing. They looked too natural, too comfortable together, a part of a world she was not a part of. Then came a short video from Mr. Thomas. She pressed play, and her heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst, a frantic drum against her ribs. The shot was from a distance, but it was clear enough to see Julian and Allison on the third-floor balcony of the hotel. His arm was around her waist, and she was resting her head on his shoulder, her long hair moving softly in the wind. And then, like a stab, she saw them share a quick kiss without trying to hide. It was a brief kiss, but it was enough to burn away the last spark of hope she had left. She replayed the video frame by frame, each image digging deeper into her soul, a slow, agonizing descent into hell. The room curtain opened slightly, and Allison came out, running to hug Julian. Her face lit up with happiness, as if she were a young girl in love. Juliet slumped into the chair, clutching the edge of the table to keep from falling apart. Mr. Thomas wrote, "They also rented the room for the afternoon. It looks like they're staying the night. I'll keep an eye on them." She read the message over and over, her throat tight, as if she were being strangled. Just a few hours earlier, Julian had written to her, "Juliet, I won't be home tonight. I have to meet a potential partner from out of town. Get some rest." The tone was sweet and caring, just as it had been for years. But now she knew it was all a lie. A well-constructed lie. A potential partner from out of town. He wasn't out of town. He was here, in a 4-star hotel with their own daughter-in-law. She opened her portable hard drive and carefully saved every photo and every video. Each time she hit save, she looked at the image as if to make sure she wasn't dreaming. In the video, Julian's gaze toward Allison was so tender. The way he caressed her hair reminded her of the way he used to do it with her more than 30 years ago. They were young, and she believed their love would last forever, a promise whispered under a starry San Diego sky. Now, seeing this, all she saw were lies and blatant betrayal. She remembered family gatherings, everyone sitting around the table, a tableau of their perfect family. Allison always sat far away from Julian. Sometimes she even looked at him with disgust. Daniel would joke, "Mom, I think Allison can't stand Dad. She avoids him like the plague." Juliet believed it, too. She thought they just didn't get along, that Allison was just trying to fit into the family. But now she understood it had all been a farce, a carefully choreographed dance of deception. They acted too well in front of her, in front of Daniel, in front of the whole neighborhood. She felt like a fool, a blind wife, betrayed by two traitors right in front of her eyes. People were going about their lives unaware of what was happening on that hotel balcony. But Mr. Thomas had captured the perfect moment like a silent hunter, a snapshot of her reality. She replied to him, "Thank you. Please keep watching. I need to know everything." He answered briefly, "I will. Stay calm." That night, she returned to the house that had been her home with Julian. It felt foreign now, a place of ghosts and lies. She opened the dresser drawer and took out a thick envelope, her hands moving with a grim determination. She printed all the evidence, photos of Julian and Allison leaving the lawyer's office, photos of them entering the hotel, photos of them on the balcony, and every frame of the video. She carefully arranged them, sealed the envelope, and hid it at the bottom of the drawer under old family photos. She looked at a photo of the four of them, Julian, Allison, Daniel, and herself, at Daniel's birthday party a few years ago. Allison was smiling, hugging Daniel tightly, while Julian stood beside Juliet with his arm on her shoulder, looking proud. Now, looking at it, all she wanted was to rip it to pieces, to tear the image of their smiling faces from her life. The next morning, just before dawn, she heard the front door open slowly. Julian staggered in, smelling of alcohol. The partner was too difficult, Juliet. He complained in a raspy voice, his eyes red as if he'd been up all night. "I had to drink a lot. I'm dead tired." She was in the kitchen with a glass of water in her hand, watching him perform while feeling like he was rubbing salt in a wound. "Rest," she replied calmly as always, the practiced voice of a wife. "You have to go to work tomorrow." He nodded, gave her a pat on the shoulder as if nothing had happened, and dragged himself to the bedroom. Minutes later, he was snoring peacefully, as if he'd never cheated on her, as if he'd never gone to a hotel with their own daughter-in-law. When she was sure Julian was asleep, her phone vibrated. It was a call from the detective, Mr. Thomas. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he feared someone would overhear him. "Mrs. Roberts, I recorded their conversation in the hotel parking lot. I used special equipment. They didn't even notice. I'm sending it to you now." Her heart pounded hard, but she simply replied, "Thank you, Thomas. Send me the file." Minutes later, an audio file appeared in her messages. She put on her headphones, sat at the table, and pressed play. The first thing she heard was Allison's voice, cold and ambitious, a stranger's voice. "Dad, hurry up with that fake contract. I want to have that whole chain of stores already. I want that old hag out of the house." Juliet felt a blow to her chest and gripped the phone tightly. Then came Julian's voice, deep and confident. "Don't worry about those papers. Juliet doesn't know anything. Leave it in my hands. She trusts me too much." It felt like a knife twisting in her heart. They weren't just cheating on her. They were planning to take everything she had built. The bakery chain, all the sweat, tears, and sleepless nights. Baking every batch. Running all over town to make deliveries to keep her reputation. It was all hers. Julian never once got his hands dirty in the kitchen. He never worked the counter or signed contracts with hotels. And now he and Allison wanted to take it all away. To kick her out of the house she had made a home. She almost broke down, but she still had the composure to copy the audio to the flash drive where she kept the other evidence. She carefully wrote down the time and place, as if trying to keep herself steady in the middle of the storm. The next morning, as she made coffee in the bakery, her phone vibrated again. Thomas sent another batch of new photos taken with a telephoto lens. In them, Julian and Allison were inside his car with a thick pile of papers in front of them. Allison had a red pen and was marking the document intently. Julian, next to her, nodded and smiled as if he were in full agreement. Thomas wrote, "I overheard something. It seems they want to use a contact at the notary's office to make the transfer. I'll investigate further." Juliet zoomed in on the photo. She could see the letters on the paper, though she couldn't read them. But she knew these weren't normal work papers. They were planning to steal everything she had worked for, step by step. She sat there among the trays of sweet pastries that smelled so delicious, but she felt as if her whole world was collapsing. She reopened the audio file, put on her headphones, and listened to every phrase, every word they said. That wretched old woman. That's what Allison called her. Juliet remembered the days when she had just joined the family, when she taught her how to make rice, when she hugged her like a daughter. She thought Allison was part of the family, that she would be the woman who, along with Daniel, would build a future. And Julian, the man she had loved since she was a girl in San Diego, who swore he would be with her until the end. They had made a joke of her, a fool who still believed in love and family. A regular customer came in, Mrs. Peterson, who always bought pastries for her grandchildren. "Juliet, your bakery has been packed lately. Your chain of stores is expanding. I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice warm. Juliet forced a smile and replied, "Thank you. I'm doing my best." But inside, she was a wreck. She wondered what Mrs. Peterson would think if she knew the truth. Would she see her as a strong woman, or just a fool betrayed by her husband and daughter-in-law? She wrapped Mrs. Peterson's pastries, said goodbye at the door, and sank into her chair, her hands on her head. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, a silent rage burned inside her like the fire in an oven, ready to ignite at any moment. That night at dinner, she sat across from Julian in the small kitchen under the yellow light that gave his face a strange, distorted glow. He ate and spoke in a monotone voice, as if nothing were wrong, as if the world wasn't about to end for him. "Juliet, I have to sign some important business papers this week. Maybe you should look them over. They're complicated." She picked up a piece of bread and pretended to take a bite, but in her head, she could only hear Allison's voice from the recording. "Dad, hurry up and sign the fake contracts." She knew he was testing the waters. He wanted to drag her into his dirty plan. She gave him a dry smile, a facade of a wife who was too tired to argue, and replied, "Yes, I'll look at them later. I'm tired now." He nodded, took a sip of wine, looking at her as if nothing were wrong. But she knew that behind that smile was a man ready to take everything she had built, a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Julian had a few more glasses of wine. His face turned red, and he started slurring his words about a difficult client he'd seen that day. She nodded as if she were listening, but inside she wanted to scream, "Do you think I'm that stupid?" When he got up, staggering, and went to the bedroom, she cleared the table, her every move slow, containing the anger that was boiling inside her. He threw himself on the bed, snoring loudly, and left his car keys on the nightstand, gleaming under the dim light, a siren's call to her revenge. She stared at them, her heart pounding in her chest. This was her chance, her moment. She entered the bedroom slowly, careful not to make a sound. Every step felt like walking between pain and resolve, between the past and a new, unknown future. She grabbed the keys, squeezed them tight, and went straight to the garage. The night was quiet, hushed, as if the world was holding its breath. All she could hear were crickets outside, their chirping a soundtrack to her silent fury. She turned on her phone's flashlight. The weak light illuminated Julian's old SUV, a silent accomplice in his betrayal. She opened the door. The smell of gasoline was still there, mixed with a strange, sweet perfume. She opened the glove compartment between the seats, and there it was, the tube of lubricant with a loose cap and dried residue on the edge, a monument to their infidelity. She held it in her hand, feeling like she was holding a dirty secret. It was clear they had used it again, as if it were confirmation that Julian and Allison were still playing their secret game, their twisted little dance. She took the tube of lubricant to the kitchen, placed it on the counter, and washed her hands with lemon soap. She scrubbed them thoroughly as if to erase every trace of the betrayal she had just touched. The fresh scent didn't calm her anger, but it helped her stay focused. She opened the tool drawer and took out a tube of clear industrial superglue, the same kind she once used to fix a chair at the bakery. It was a tool of her trade, now a weapon of her revenge. She carefully unscrewed the cap of the lubricant and filled the tube with the glue, drop by drop, until it was completely full. She wiped the nozzle, shook it gently to mix it, and tested it a little. It came out smoothly, just like the original lubricant. At a glance, no one would notice the difference. She smiled faintly, though a hurricane was raging inside her. This wasn't a game. It was the first step to getting justice. She put the tube back in the glove compartment, adjusted the floor mat and the seat just as they were, as if no one had touched anything, before closing the car. She opened the trunk to check. There were only crumpled bags, an empty water bottle, and an unused condom lying in a corner. Her heart skipped a beat, but she wasn't surprised anymore. She took pictures with her phone, adding them to the growing collection of evidence. Each image was another piece, A reminder that she couldn't let Julian and Allison get away with their lies. Back in the house, she put the keys back in their place next to Julian's alarm clock. She grabbed an old book and sat on the living room sofa, pretending to read. The dim light fell on the pages, but she couldn't read a word. Her head was spinning. She thought of Daniel, her son, who believed he was living happily with Allison without knowing the truth. How could she tell him that his wife and his own father were betraying them? She thought of the bakery chain, of the 40 years of work and sleepless nights, of all the fights with Julian to defend her dream. He never really understood it, but she trusted that he supported her. Now she knew he was just waiting for the right moment to take everything. An hour later, Julian woke up and stumbled into the kitchen for water. He saw the keys on the counter and didn't suspect a thing. "Still not sleeping, Juliet?" he asked groggily. She smiled and replied, "No, I'm just reading a bit. Finish your water and go back to bed." He nodded, drank, and returned to the bedroom, snoring immediately. She looked at him as if he were a stranger. This man, who once promised to be with her until the end, was now planning to destroy what she loved most. But he didn't know that she had already started her counterattack. At dawn, she got up. The sunlight was timidly entering through the bakery window. She was in her usual kitchen, kneading dough, preparing flans and sweet pastries for a large hotel order. She pressed the dough with all her might, channeling her rage into every movement. When she returned home for breakfast, she made an effort to keep a calm face. Julian was already up with a cup of black coffee in his hand. She served him eggs and toast. "Julian," she said calmly, "I have to travel to Nashville tomorrow to sign a contract with a new partner. I'm sure I'll be home late. Can you take care of dinner?" She watched him out of the corner of her eye. He looked up, surprised, but in his eyes, something was shining that wasn't concern. It was relief. "A big contract?" he asked, taking her hand with feigned tenderness. "Don't worry. Go ahead. I'll handle it." But that spark in his eyes, that slight curve of his lips, as if a weight had been lifted, pierced her chest. He wanted her to leave, and she knew exactly why. She smiled and nodded. "Thanks. I'll call you if I get back late." He took another sip of coffee. Then he got up, saying he had to get to the office early. As he left, she saw he had left his phone on the table, and the screen lit up with a missed call. The name that appeared was A.T. She frowned. Her heart pounded. Allison Thomas. She was sure it was her. Before she could touch the phone, Julian came back, grabbed it in a hurry, and turned off the screen in front of her. "I forgot it," he mumbled with a forced smile. And he was gone. She stood there watching the door close, feeling as if she had been slapped. He wasn't even bothering to hide it anymore. That day, she worked like a machine, delivering bread, signing invoices, and smiling at customers. But her mind was only focused on Julian and Allison. She couldn't let them continue their farce behind her back and Daniel's. She needed more evidence, to hear from their own mouths what they said when they thought no one was listening. That night, she pretended to be tired. She went to bed early and told Julian, "I have to wake up early tomorrow to catch the bus, so I'm going to sleep." He nodded and gave her a pat on the shoulder. "Rest, Juliet. Be careful on your trip tomorrow." She lay down and closed her eyes, but she sharpened her hearing, attentive to every sound in the house. Close to midnight, when Julian's snoring stopped, she heard him get out of bed quietly. The faint light from his phone shone in the darkness. He left the room with his phone, thinking she was asleep. She stayed still, her heart pounding. Then she slowly got up and followed him on tiptoe. She hid behind the thick living room curtain and saw him standing in a dark corner near the window. He put the phone to his ear and spoke softly. "Yes, of course. Come over to the house tomorrow. We won't have to go to a hotel anymore. Juliet has to leave town to sign a contract, and she'll be back late." She heard a soft giggle from the other side. Allison's sweet voice. "That's great, Dad. Finally, we can relax." Julian laughed, replying, "Yeah, come early. I'll be waiting." Juliet stood there behind the curtain, feeling her blood boil. They weren't just cheating on her. They were planning to turn her house, her son's home and hers, into their meeting place. She returned to the bedroom in silence, opened a drawer, and took out Daniel's old recorder, the one she bought him for college to record his classes. She checked the battery, put in a new one, and turned on continuous recording. She hid it behind the bookshelf in the bedroom next to the headboard, certain it would capture everything. She carefully adjusted the cable and covered it with a family photo frame. the photo of the four of them at Daniel and Allison's wedding. Looking at it, she felt a bitter taste. Allison's smile, Julian's hug. Now, they were all lies. Before going back to bed, she checked again that the recorder was working. She placed the photo frame just right to hide the cable. Then, she lay down, pretending to be asleep. Julian came back to the bedroom, threw himself on the bed, and snored as if nothing were wrong. But her eyes were wide open in the darkness, more awake than ever. She reached for the clock and set the alarm for earlier than usual. She closed her eyes, but not to sleep. She was ready for the next step of her plan. She woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning when it was still dark. Only the faint light from the streetlights was coming through the window. The house was silent. All she could hear was Julian's steady snoring from the bedroom. She was in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee in her hand, staring at the skillet of oil that was already on the stove. It was the last step of her plan, a simple smoke trap, but enough to expose the truth. She tied a thin string to the stove's igniter. She ran it over to the window and attached it to a heavy object, an old coffee can she found in the cabinet. All she had to do was pull it from a distance, and the flame would ignite the oil, creating thick black smoke, enough to alarm the neighbors. She opened the window by the stove a little so the smoke could get out. Then she tested it once. The smoke rose quickly, forming spirals like a warning. She turned it off immediately, checked everything again, and made sure not to leave any trace that might make Julian suspicious. She put on a jacket, grabbed her large purse, and pretended to be leaving for her trip. Before she left, she went into the bedroom and gently shook Julian. "I have to go to the bus station right now," she said in a calm voice. "I'm going to sign a contract. I'll probably be back late tonight." He opened his eyes and, in a sleepy voice, replied, "All right. Be careful, Juliet. Call me if you need anything." Then he buried his face in his pillow and went back to sleep. She looked at the man she once loved and trusted, now lying there unaware of the trap waiting for him. She turned away, her heart heavy, but her legs steady. Instead of going to the station, she went across the street to Mrs. Peterson's house. She was her neighbor and her friend. She opened the door and looked at Juliet, worried, when she saw her purse. "Juliet, what are you doing up so early? Is something wrong?" she asked with affection. Juliet forced a smile. "Mrs. Peterson, can I stay here for a few hours? I need to watch my house." She frowned, but didn't say anything else. She poured Juliet a hot cup of coffee and gave her a chair by the window. From there, she could see the entrance to her house, where Julian and Allison would enter and where the truth would be revealed. Around 10 o'clock, a taxi pulled up in front of the house. Allison got out, wearing a light floral dress and dark sunglasses, as if she were afraid someone would recognize her. Julian opened the door, looked around in a hurry, and quickly ushered her inside. Juliet gripped her coffee cup tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's time," she murmured and turned on the app on her phone connected to the hidden recorder she had left in the bedroom. The sound started coming through her headphones. Allison's laughter, the clinking of glasses, heavy footsteps. Then she heard Julian's deep voice. "All right, we don't have to hide in a hotel anymore." Allison laughed. "You really know how to pick your moments. The old hag is gone, right?" Juliet bit her lips, holding back the rage as she listened to Allison call her the old hag, with so much contempt. Then the bed started to creak, along with other sounds she didn't want to keep listening to. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and told herself, "Just a little longer, Juliet. Just a little longer." A few minutes later, suddenly, Allison screamed, "What the hell is this? We're stuck." Her voice was filled with panic, almost sobbing. Julian growled, "Shut up. Wait, let me see." Juliet smiled. She barely touched her phone and activated the smoke trap remotely. The string pulled hard. The stove ignited. The skillet of oil caught fire. Black smoke billowed out of the kitchen window in thick spirals, spreading outside like an alarm signal. Mrs. Peterson gasped. She looked out the window. "Juliet, your house is on fire." Juliet pretended to be scared, but inside she felt strangely calm. Neighbors started coming out into their yards, shouting, "Juliet's house is on fire. Call the firefighters." A man nearby, Mr. Miller, quickly took out his phone and called the city fire department. She stayed there, holding her coffee cup tightly, her eyes fixed on her house. Everything was going according to plan. In her headphones, Allison's voice sounded more and more desperate. Julian, do something. I can't move. Julian's voice roared. Don't scream. I'm trying. But Juliet knew they couldn't do anything. The industrial superglue she had swapped was already at work, leaving them trapped at their most humiliating moment. She imagined them struggling, scared, and a part of her felt satisfied. Not because she was cruel, but because they had pushed her to this. They wanted to take her bakery, her family, even her honor. Now she would make them pay. She looked out the window. The smoke continued to rise, getting thicker. The neighbors were crowding together, yelling in a panic. What's going on? Someone asked. Where's Juliet? She went out of town for work. That's what I heard, another replied. Mrs. Peterson, standing next to her, looked at her with suspicious eyes but didn't say anything. She just squeezed Juliet's hand gently. Juliet knew she had a hunch, but she didn't need to give her an explanation. The truth was about to explode, and she was ready. Just 10 minutes later, the siren of a fire truck sounded at the end of the street like a death knell. The red vehicle sped up and skidded to a stop in front of her house. She saw Daniel jump out of the driver's seat in his fire chief uniform, his face tense. Her son shouted in a firm voice, "Get the equipment ready, quick. There might be people inside." She looked at him and felt a sharp pain. Her son, always so proud of his family and his parents. Now he was about to face the cruelest truth. She wanted to run and hug him and say, "I'm sorry, Daniel." But she had no other choice. She stayed still, letting everything take its course. The smoke from the kitchen continued to rise thickly, making Daniel and his team believe there was a serious fire. Her son led the way with a sledgehammer, breaking down the front door. The sound of splintering would echoed in the air. His teammates followed him with hoses and extinguishers. She listened to the commotion coming from the bedroom. Julian's desperate shouts mixed with Allison's sobs. "Do something, Julian. I can't move." Julian growled. "Shut up. Don't scream." Juliet bit her lips, squeezing the phone where the app was still transmitting the audio from the hidden microphone. They were trapped, helpless, just as she had calculated. Daniel entered the bedroom, and she could imagine what he found. His own father and his wife, naked, stuck to each other on the bed, their faces pale with pain and panic. She wasn't there, but through her headphones, she heard Daniel's voice falter. "What? What is this?" A firefighter behind him murmured in surprise, "Oh my God." Another couldn't hold back and let out a nervous laugh, but Daniel immediately shouted, "Silence." She knew that cry wasn't just to maintain order, but her son's last attempt to hide his pain. The humiliation was now exposed not just to Daniel, but to the entire fire team and the whole neighborhood. A firefighter ran out and told Daniel, "Chief, the smoke is under control. It was just a small oil fire. Nothing serious." But Daniel didn't reply. Juliet figured her son was still in the bedroom, frozen by what he was seeing. The neighbors started to arrive, crowding in front of the door, pointing and whispering. "What's happening?" "It's Julian and his daughter-in-law," a woman shouted, her voice full of amazement. "Oh my God, how could this have happened?" Another chimed in. Mrs. Peterson, standing next to Juliet, took out her phone and silently started recording, moving the camera closer to Julian and Allison, who were writhing in bed, their faces contorted with pain. She looked at Juliet with eyes full of pity and anger. "Juliet, you knew about this, didn't you?" Juliet didn't answer. She just nodded softly without taking her eyes off the window. Daniel came out of the bedroom. She heard the thud of his boots on the hardwood floor. Through the headset, she heard Julian shout in a raspy voice, "Get everyone out of here. Close the door, Daniel." But it was too late. The whole neighborhood was gathered, their faces showing disdain, their whispers sounding like a chorus of shame. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law caught in the act. "Unbelievable," a man exclaimed. "Poor Juliet. How did it come to this?" Another sighed. The firefighters, after a moment of hesitation, had to act. They wrapped sheets around Julian and Allison, trying to cover their stuck-together bodies, and carried them out on stretchers. She could hear Allison's broken sobs mixed with her groans of pain. "Please do something. I can't stand it anymore." Julian just mumbled weakly, "Don't let anyone see us." But the whole neighborhood had already seen. There were looks of revulsion, mocking laughs, and shakes of disappointed heads. They were carried out wrapped in a thin sheet amidst the growing murmurs. "What a disgrace. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law. My God, how filthy." The crowd was still gathered at the entrance when the ambulance left with its siren blaring. Among the loud voices, she heard bursts of laughter. "What a show!" shouted Mr. Miller. "I can't believe there are two people so shameless in this world." An old woman shook her head and whispered to the person next to her. Poor Juliet. She stood among the people, pretending to be surprised as if she had just run there from the bus station. Daniel stood motionless in the yard, his arms hanging, his face pale as a ghost. His teammates avoided looking at him and quietly gathered their tools. Juliet knew that Daniel wasn't just shocked to see his father and his wife stuck together in bed, but by the double betrayal of the two people he loved most. She wanted to run and hug him, to tell him she was sorry for letting him see something like that, but she held back and walked behind Mrs. Peterson, who silently accompanied her to the hospital. They sat in the third-floor hallway waiting while she maintained the concerned look of a wife who had just found out her house had been on fire. Hours later, a doctor came out, sweat on his forehead. He looked at her and spoke in a low voice. "Mrs. Roberts, we managed to separate them. Fortunately, there was no serious damage. They just need some skin ointment." She nodded, pretending to be relieved, while her fingers discreetly brushed against her purse where she had hidden 2 tubes of thick mustard she had prepared. "Thank you, doctor," she said, her voice trembling to hide her plans. "Can I see them?" He nodded and led her to the nurse's station, where they gave her 2 tubes of ointment. The nurse, a young woman, looked at her with compassion. "Ma'am, this is a very difficult situation. I'm so sorry." Juliet gave a weak smile, and the moment she turned around, she swapped the tubes for the mustard she had in her purse. Her hands moved quickly and confidently, as if she had rehearsed it hundreds of times in her head. She entered the hospital room with a tube of mustard in her hand, feigning concern. "Julian, Allison, are you okay?" Allison was in bed, her hair a mess, her eyes red, unable to look at Juliet. Julian, still pale, mumbled, "Juliet, I can explain." But Juliet didn't let him continue. She placed the tube of mustard on the table next to the bed and left. Minutes later, a gut-wrenching scream came from the room. Allison was covering her face, crying, "It burns. My skin is on fire." Julian was writhing in bed, cursing, "What the hell is this? Who did this?" The entire hallway was in an uproar. Patients and family members came out to look. An old woman whispered to her son, "It's them. The couple from the video this morning on the internet. The father-in-law with the daughter-in-law. What a disgrace." Another added, "They deserve it." The doctor ran into the room, asking the nurses to clean their skin and apply a neutralizing agent. But the humiliation of Julian and Allison was already public, impossible to stop. Mrs. Peterson's video of them being carried out on a stretcher had spread throughout the neighborhood and on social media. Juliet was in the hallway listening to the murmurs, feeling as if the whole world were witnessing the downfall of those 2 traitors. When the crowd dispersed, Daniel entered the room with a thick folder in his hand. She had called him as soon as the ambulance left, asking him to get the envelope with the evidence she had saved in the drawer and the 2 divorce papers she had ready. He handed her the folder, his gaze empty, without saying a word. She opened it, took out the documents, and placed them on the table in front of Julian and Allison. She looked at him directly in the eyes, her voice cold but firm. 40 years of marriage end here. Sign these, and then do whatever you want, as long as you disappear from my son's life and mine." Allison collapsed, crying, looking at Daniel. "Honey, forgive me. I made a mistake. Please, I beg you, forgive me." But Daniel just looked at her, his gaze as hard as stone, and left without saying a word. Julian tried to grab Juliet's hand, his voice trembling. "Juliet, listen to me. I didn't want this." She pulled away, cutting him off. "Don't say anything else, Julian. You chose this path." He yelled desperately, "Juliet, please." But the nurse came in and warned, "Be quiet. This is a hospital." Juliet turned and walked away without looking back. In the hallway, she saw Daniel leaning against the wall, his head in his hands. She walked over and put her hand on his shoulder, but he didn't lift his face. "Mom," he whispered, his voice broken. "Why did it have to be Dad? Why her?" She didn't answer. She just hugged him tightly, sharing his pain with her own. In that moment, she knew that Julian and Allison had lost everything. Their honor, their marriage, even their dirty plan. But Daniel and she had also lost a family. She only hoped that with time, they would find peace. A few weeks after the scandal, her bakery was busier than ever. The little bell on the door wouldn't stop ringing. Customers came in and out with smiles and compliments. "Juliet, you are so strong," Mrs. Peterson said, holding a bag of freshly baked flan. "The whole neighborhood is proud of you for how you defended your family business amidst all that filth." Juliet smiled and thanked her. People supported her. They called her a strong woman, but only she knew that strength came from the broken pieces of her heart. Every time she looked at the oven where she had worked with sweat and tears for 40 years, she remembered Julian and Allison, who wanted to take everything from her, but failed. And she was still there with her bakery, with Daniel, and with a new life. Daniel moved in with her right after that day. He didn't talk much about what had happened, but she noticed the change. He wasn't the cheerful, always laughing Daniel he used to be. His eyes now looked deep, as if they carried a wound that wouldn't heal. "Mom, I want to stay here for a while," he told her the first night as he came in with his suitcase. "I'm going to help you run the bakery, talk to clients, whatever you need." She hugged him. She felt the warmth of the son she had raised and just nodded without asking anything. She knew Daniel needed time, and so did she. Every morning, they opened the bakery together. She prepared the oven and arranged the trays, and Daniel reviewed invoices and called hotels and restaurants. "Mom, the Grand Hotel wants to increase their sweet pastry order for next week," he called out to her from the cash register, his voice calm, but without its usual brightness. "All right," she replied. "Confirm the order. I'll prepare more dough." These simple moments gave her a peace she hadn't felt in years. There were no more fake looks from Julian, no more sweet and calculating voice from Allison. It was just Daniel and her, taking care of what they still had. Dinners were just the two of them now. They sat face to face in the small kitchen, eating simple meals. Sometimes rice with beans and chicken, sometimes just bread with coffee. "Mom, can you make me some flan this weekend?" he asked her one night with a faint smile, the first she had seen since the scandal. "All right," she replied, relieved. "But you have to help me stir the caramel." He nodded. And in that moment, she felt that they were slowly but surely recovering. She started making time for herself, something she almost never did in 40 years. She joined a cooking club at the community center where women her age shared recipes and told their stories. "Juliet, you make the best flan in the neighborhood," a woman told her, laughing, when she brought a tray. She replied, smiling, "It's a little trick I learned back in San Diego." She also started going to church on weekends. She would sit in silence with the light of the stained glass windows on her face and pray, not for Julian or Allison, but for Daniel and for herself, so that they would find the strength to move forward. Sometimes she would go for walks with Mrs. Peterson in the town square, listening to her talk about neighborhood gossip. "You know, Juliet," she would say, her eyes shining, "everyone is still talking about Julian and Allison, but they say you're the one who won." Juliet just smiled without answering. She won, maybe, but the price was losing her whole family. Daniel also started to change. He became less quiet and began telling her about his work as a firefighter. "We put out a fire at the market yesterday," he told her one night as they ate dinner. "It was really dangerous, Mom. But luckily, no one got hurt." She listened to him, her heart filled with pride. "Please be careful," she said, her voice trembling. "You're all I have left." Daniel looked at her with tenderness. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll never leave you alone." Those words were like medicine. They gave her back the faith that even though she had lost so much, she still had her son, who would always be with her. One afternoon, while the bakery was full of customers, she sat at the cash register, watching the movement in the street. The bell on the door rang nonstop. The smell of sweet bread filled the air. She looked at the trays of flan and pastries and thought about the entire journey. She had built this bakery with her own hands, from a girl in San Diego to a woman who knew how to endure. Julian and Allison wanted to take everything from her, but they failed. She kept her bakery. She kept Daniel. And most importantly, she kept herself.